Welcome to the Star Wars Universe podcast. Today we're talking about The Clone Wars, Season 2, Episodes 12, 13, and 14. The Mandalore Plot, Voyage of Temptation, and Duchess of Mandalore. We'll be getting into the stories about the Mandalorians. We'll be getting into stories about galactic politics. And we'll be talking about, did Obi-Wan have a secret love life? All that and more after this commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. As I said, I'm Matthew. I'm your host. I'm joined, as always, for the Clone Wars with Riki and Sarah Hayashi. How are you folks doing tonight?
We're doing all right.
Yeah. Fantastic. Ooh. We're going to keep saying this starting now, I think, but this is the best arc so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're getting into that part of the series where it's just like, oh yeah, it keeps getting better.
Yeah. Until now, I feel like we've had some individual good episodes. Even then there was some weak parts. Now I feel it's really when we're getting to the heart of the show where I feel like, okay, this is some good stuff to talk about.
This could have been a good movie, right?
Yeah.
3 episodes, flesh it out maybe a little bit.
Yeah, and it's got a clear beginning, a middle, and an end, and it sets up, it plays off of things we've already seen, and it sets up, more story to be told, but it definitely has a sort of clear trajectory. And today, instead of doing what we've done in the past where we cover it episode by episode, because this is really a very specific arc, we're going to just talk about all 3 together. So let me just kind of give a brief summary of the plot, and you all please jump in with stuff I miss. We find out that the planet of Mandalore, the home of Mandalorians, is remaining neutral in this conflict, and it's actually the head of a 1,200 world organization called the, I think it's the Council of Neutral Systems. The Council of Neutral Systems. I may be wrong on that exact name. But there is a suspicion that Duchess Satine, who is the head of Mandalore at the moment, that she might be secretly working with the Separatists. And so Obi-Wan Kenobi is sent to investigate. In the course of the investigation, they find out that she does genuinely want peace, that she wants to remain neutral, but that people on her planet and on the moons of her planet, in a group called Death Watch, are trying to bring back the Mandalorian warrior culture. They don't want peace. And they've been working with the Separatists, not necessarily because they believe in the Separatist aims, but because they want the whole planet to return to its warlike ways. And they think that if people think the planet is Separatist, then the Republic will invade, and then it will sort of stir up this revolution. And so we have assorted hijinks along the way. People are captured and freed and try to do things. Satine eventually heads to Coruscant to discuss this issue, where Obi-Wan and a number of others are trying hard to push her towards bringing in the Republic and bringing in the military. And at one point it seems like that's going to happen because there is a tape given that Satine, it seems, is not actually being honest, and that most of her people do want the Republic to intervene. And so it looks like the Republic is going to intervene. We find out along the way, obviously, that Darth Sidious, Chancellor Palpatine, is kind of pulling some machinations to make that happen. But our heroes are able to prove that the whole thing was a hoax, and that they don't actually want the Republic to come. At that point, there's more hijinks. She disguised herself as a civilian. People try to assassinate her. And eventually, with Obi-Wan's cunning, they find out that the senator from Mandalore was also in on the plot. And so eventually the plot is exposed, and Death Watch is seemingly taken down, at least for the moment. And along the way, we get to learn a lot more about the Republic politics, about the politics of countries that are not interested in the war. And we also learn that Obi-Wan and Satine had themselves quite a past, and that, as they both say at one point, she wanted him to leave the Jedi for her, and he says that if she had made that clear, he would have left the Jedi. And then we get a lot of Anakin smirking, realizing that Obi-Wan is not perhaps quite the unemotional oak that he often portrays himself to be. Anything big I missed on the plot?
No, I think that was the good Cliff's Notes. There's witty asides I'd like to add, but I think we covered the plot.
Cool. So Riki, I'll start with you. What'd you kind of like about this plot so much? What makes this arc something that really kind of you got turned into?
I love schmaltzy rom-com type stuff. So this is right up my alley. That's why I want this to be a movie.
Yeah. I think it's very
nodding
well put.
her head. Yeah, because it's like the classic old flame plotline where like, oh, like will they or won't they? And they won't, and they don't or won't. But yeah, there's questions of did they in the past? And then there's a confession scene where they confess their feelings, even though it might not be their actual feelings. Like they might have been just playing those parts in order to distract the villain in that scene. But I felt like I wanted to read it as genuine.
Yeah,
about, like that was them confessing, even though it was to distract the villain.
Yeah, I definitely thought that was real. And it's interesting. I definitely liked the rom-com part of it. For me, though, it's from a very different direction. What I love here is the politics. I love that we are now getting, more of a sense of what does it mean to be somewhere that doesn't really want to be on the side of the Republic or the Separatists, and like how does all that work? And we're getting somewhat of a picture of internal Mandalorian politics. And some of it's kind of heavy-handed, but as we'll get to, I think a lot of it is making interesting parallels with kind of stuff that happens in our own world about politics and warfare and civil wars and stuff like that.
But Matthew, is this how a republic works? Like, do I need to go back to civics class? The United States of America is technically a republic, right?
Right.
Constitutionally. So if the United States goes to war with another country, can Kentucky just be like, nah, we don't want to?
Kentucky actually did exactly that.
Oh.
During the American Civil War, I forget, I'm really trying not to history-splain here, but like I think it's kind of an interesting thing. I think they're very intentionally trying to reference that. During the American Civil War, you had a number of states that were the border states that basically refused to be a part of fighting the South, but also did not themselves leave the Union. Kentucky being one of the prominent ones. And there's all kind of complicated politics there, and part of it was that Lincoln worried that if he pushed them too hard, they would leave the Union. And I do think that here they blur the lines a lot, because it does seem like instead of it being just sort of part of the Republic, these are a whole group that have formed like an actual like council and organization. So it seems like they're separate from the Republic, but they're also still part of the Republic, which feels a little weird to me, because it certainly the Council of Neutral Systems, what it distinctly reminds me of is the Council of Unaligned Nations. That I don't think it's a council, the something of unaligned nations that happened during the Cold War, where a number of countries led by India and Egypt, among others, all kind of like worked together to say like we don't want to be part of either the U.S. bloc or the Soviet bloc. But they were, as you said, you couldn't be both part of NATO and part of that. So the lines definitely do get pretty blurry there, but there is at least some historical relevance to, I think, what they're trying to say.
Yeah, and it's not like just Mandalore and its moon. Like the things that Satine says, she's in charge of like 1,500 systems and like thousands of planets in that system. So it's clearly like a large faction of the Republic wants to be neutral, but are still in the Republic. But like we've seen that before with like, isn't the banking clan? Mm-hmm. Don't they have representation in the Senate, but are still quote unquote neutral, even though we find out they're aligned with the Separatists?
Well, the Nemodians still have representation in the Senate.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a lot of it is unclear as to what the difference is between a race and then like a political party, I suppose.
Right.
Within that race.
And
so the Trade Federation like is part of the Separatists, but most of their planets are still in the Republic?
Yeah.
Question mark? Even
later, like we in later seasons we deal with some banking clan shenanigans. And isn't the representative that they pick for the banking clan is also part of the Republic Senate? But they pick him because he had like some ties to the Separatists and seemed like a good middle ground dude?
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely. I wish they spelled it out more because again, like I mean, there are parallels. You know, I mean, think of how many times we America during the Cold War said, "Oh, that's just independent American civilians who decided to all fly to Honduras or Nicaragua to join the anti-communist freedom fighters." It just so happened they were all former CIA agents or whatever it is. Like, but I agree with you. I think. To me, we get more of a picture of the politics, but it's certainly nowhere near good enough. There's a lot we still don't understand.
Yeah, and also, as far as politics go, it takes, like, one video conference with one dude for them to be like, yeah, we'll invade that planet. It just seems a little rash.
It's fake news, right? Like, a doctored video almost caused an intergalactic incident.
Yeah.
I mean, it was doctored audio that got us into Vietnam. So, like, I guess with all this stuff, I think you're right. And I think that it's, I'm probably giving the writers too much credit, but I definitely feel like all of these things are things that I feel like are not outside the realm of possibility because they've happened in our own world.
Mm. And like, we know that it's all orchestrated in universe because it's,
Palpatine pulls all the strings.
Yeah.
Sheev.
Good old Sheev.
Good old Sheath, or good old Palps, as he's referred to, I believe, in some of the novels.
Ooh, that sounds like a disease.
So, like, there's a Pokemon Go. There's a Pokemon called Palpitoad. So
that's hilarious.
Emperor Palpitoad.
I will also say, and maybe we just saw it very differently. I also really liked this political plot line mostly because of the position it put Mandalorian and the Duchess. And again, because here the parallel I'm seeing is, sort of the independent countries that might have been having their own sort of internal conflict, but both the communists and the Americans or the NATO folks, both try to sort of support one faction and say like, no, of course we're doing this for your own good when it's all just a proxy.
Afghanistan.
Because Afghanistan is, the British and Russians did that for hundreds of years there. Because to me, it's a perfect example. Like, to me, I find it so telling about Obi-Wan and about the Republic, how quickly he falls into that. He seems very quick to try to push Satine into, joining the Republic's side and saying like, oh, you can't stay neutral. The war has to come to you.
Yeah, I mean, but on the other hand, I do think Satine is maybe being a little willfully ignorant in the whole, like, we're gonna stay neutral while there's just, like, war raging around her. And I think Obi-Wan has a point. Like, the war is going to come to Mandalore. The war has already come to Mandalore. She just doesn't realize it. Mm-hmm. So, like, this idea of, like, I'm not going to pick a side isn't necessarily feasible.
Interesting.
I don't think they do a good enough job of explaining, we talked about this in the past, of explaining the separatists. Right. And what their political goals are for us to feel like worlds can stay neutral.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess it resonated more for me, but I can totally understand why that would not happen.
Yeah, it just felt like a lot of, I don't know. I've seen a couple people like nowadays trying to be like, oh, I'm just staying out of politics. I don't want to get into politics. And it's like, by virtue of living in the society right now,
that's a fair point.
Have to get into politics, and I feel like Satine, being Duchess of Mandalore, is in a very similar position. Like she can't abstain from politics. Like, she's the leader of a planet in a system of planets.
Yeah,
that's a lot of systems too.
A lot of systems, yeah, not like one or two. Like,
we don't really get a sense of scale of Star Wars galactic politics.
Like, the scale of it never seems to make sense.
Yeah, the universe is really, really big.
it just doesn't seem, Well, I guess so. Let me kind of throw it out there because obviously I think we see it very differently. So, what was your take of the? Was there stuff you liked about what they had to say about galactic politics in this, or did you think it was all just kind of badly told?
I mean, like, I enjoyed it. I liked the conversation around it. I think I just maybe agreed a little more with Obi-Wan than you did, Matthew. But I don't think that's wrong.
Oh, no. I think both.
Okay, wait. So Sarah agrees with Obi-Wan. Matthew, you agree with Satine?
I think so. Well, especially, and we'll get more into this, I think the comments she makes to Obi-Wan and to Anakin about how warlike the Jedi have become, I think are very accurate. But even just putting that aside, I feel like the way at least I got the story presented is it seemed like there's this internal conflict within the Mandalorians, and the Separatists are definitely supporting one side, and that's certainly a bad thing, but that the Republic coming in to support the other side isn't going to make it any better. It's actually going to make it much worse. And that the best thing the Republic can do, that in that regard, Satine is quite justified, I think, in saying, I want to stay neutral, because the war hasn't come to her. It's that one side is trying to take sides in the internal conflict.
So then I suppose it's up to me to take the side of Pre-Vizsla, the third party in all this.
Ooh, that's not the side you want to be on.
So Pre-Vizsla is the Mandalorian. He starts as the governor of Concordia.
Which is the moon of Mandalore.
Yeah, which is a populated moon, because there's lots of those in this universe.
Where all the warriors were sent.
Mm-hmm.
And then died out, because apparently being a warrior is genetic, which I didn't quite understand. But
they probably killed each other by warrioring. But Pre-Vizsla, which is a weird name, his first name is Pre.
Yeah, that's a weird name.
Is secretly the leader of Death Watch.
Which is also a weird name.
Which is a bad name to give your organization from a PR standpoint.
Yes.
I
kind of hope maybe it's a bad translation or something like that. A little bit of propaganda in the translation. Because, Death Watch is not a good PR move.
No. I mean, Darkseid is also not a great PR move, but...
Also true.
He's delightfully voiced by Jon Favreau.
You say delightfully.
Oh, I hadn't realized that was him.
I like it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, Jon Favreau, big old nerd, but yeah. Pre-Vizsla.
Yeah, so he's conspiring with the Separatists. Like, he's in communication with Dooku.
Right.
And they have all their kind of like machinations. Like, oh, like if you do this, then we can come in and take over. So he basically wants to rule Mandalore. And is trying to use this to oust Satine. Yeah,
as far as I can tell, he has no loyalty to the Separatist cause. He just thinks the Separatists can be a useful ally in his internal politics of Mandalore.
Yeah.
Yeah. He wants the Separatists' help to basically con the Republic into showing up to police Mandalore, which would upset the Mandalorian population, and then Death Watch can come in and rid them of the Republic, which would be good for the Separatists, and then hopefully good enough that the people would be like, hey, these Death Watch folk are pretty alright, despite their name being Death Watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like Jon Favreau a lot. I didn't love his voicing of Pre-Vizsla, but maybe that's just because I'm too familiar with Jon Favreau's voice and couldn't get Jon Favreau out of my head. So I'm curious, Matthew, because you said you didn't realize that was him. What you thought about the way Pre-Vizsla sounded, I guess.
I thought he was fine. I thought he was an interesting character who had I found him a lot more compelling than a lot of the other villains we've had, because as we've said, the Separatists have not been in any way explained, but here was a person who had, easily definable goals that I could understand, and it's still a little bit the mustache twirly of I want us to return to being a warrior race. That seems a little bit silly, but he to me he was a much more interesting villain than or antagonist than most of the ones we've gotten before. And I think his voice just sounded like one more voice. I certainly didn't pick up on anything special about it. Was there something in particular about his voice that bothered you?
Yeah, he just sounded... I was talking to Enrique about it while we were watching it, and he's like, well, what do you want him to sound like? I'm like, I don't know, I want him to sound douchier, I guess. More of a jerk, more
But we have those.
We do have those.
Dooku has the, I am Count Dooku.
Yeah, and everyone has a vaguely European / transatlantic accent. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a very, very, very minor... I don't even want to say beef.
That's legit.
It's a minor concern, minor thought I had.
And just to be clear, earlier, I certainly wasn't saying that you're wrong for disagreeing with me on the neutrality idea. I was just trying to generate more conversation because we'd hit kind of a lull there. But yeah, no, I think it's definitely, to me, that's a good part of the show. Is we're now at the point where like I think what side someone should be on is not clear anymore, and I think that to me the show did a pretty good job of presenting the issues in a way that it's not 100% clear whose side we should wind up on.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. Especially if we think back to the episode where they go to the planet full of, I forget what race they are. They're like the little Irish folk, but they're not Irish. And the leader of that planet was just like so staunchly like, we're not gonna fight anybody ever, and the separatists were like literally on their planet blowing stuff up, and he's like, let's not fight anyone. It just felt really strange, whereas at least like with Satine wanting to remain neutral, like they have this tie to this warrior like past that she's actively trying to push away from, like so I can really see her motivations behind it, and she doesn't realize that Death Watch and the separatists are conspiring, so she thinks that they are far removed from the war, so like it makes sense why she wants to remain neutral. And I think you alluded to it earlier, Matthew, but there's a good line she has where Obi-Wan says that they're fighting for peace, and she's like, oh, fighting for peace, that's a contradiction. Yeah,
I wrote it down because I thought it was such an interesting exchange. So Sabine says, after Obi-Wan had just given her this long speech about why he thinks that they should join the war, and I think he actually ends with saying, I'm a general. And Sabine says, I remember a time when the Jedi were not generals, but peacemakers. Anakin then says, we are protectors, Highness, yours at the moment. We fight for peace. And then Sabine says, what an amusing contradiction.
Yes, yeah.
What was your kind of take on that exchange?
Satine.
Sabine
is actually a different.
Yeah, that's right.
Character.
Satine.
Oh yeah,
which
you're
is interesting.
So,
so Satine. This is like a tangent, but Satine is the name of Nicole Kidman's character in Moulin Rouge, where she plays opposite Ewan McGregor.
Okay,
so I don't know if that was intentional or not.
I think it was 100%.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
Good.
Yeah, that sounds like such
I wish they would sing some songs then.
That'd be fun.
But they do have great chemistry.
So for both of you, what's your take on that exchange? What do you think's going on there, and what do we kind of learn from that?
They want to kiss.
Yes.
It's one of those like argument leads into a kiss things, and they don't actually.
We'll get to the romance part, I promise. But I just mean in terms of like the position on like the Jedi as protectors or peacemakers or warlike people.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with Satine's point of view that the Jedi have become too warlike, but I don't necessarily agree that fighting for peace is a contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that the Jedi, this feels like a religion and politics thing where the Jedi have gotten too wrapped up in the political nature of things, and that's not really their purpose. But the idea of fighting for peace is something that I get behind and don't see a contradiction in.
Yeah.
I just don't know if it's the Jedi who should be doing it.
Yeah, they shouldn't. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
You have to fight for peace if evil is fighting you.
Yeah.
And we've had this question of, are the separatists evil? Like, what do they actually want to do? But, presuming that they are, like, the Republic should fight them. However, I don't think the Jedi should be. And ultimately, like, at the end, and by end I mean Empire Strikes Back, like, Yoda pretty much comes to this conclusion, right? Like, that they were just wrong to have been involved in this conflict.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because I think you're right. It's kind of a threading of the needle there. Like, I think 10 years ago, I would have had a very pacifist idea, and maybe even the first time I saw the show, like, yeah, you can't fight for peace. You've got to, non-violence your way to peace. And I think especially the last 5 years have really changed me on that and made me realize, like I said, yeah, you can't be Chamberlain. When evil makes it clear that they want to fight, you have to fight back. Mm-hmm. I think to me though, I like the idea that it shouldn't be the Jedi, and especially I think to me what this is getting at is the I may have mentioned this metaphor before, but I really keep thinking of the idea of like when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Mm-hmm. And then I think this is an instance where part of what she's saying is that the Jedi have become so locked into their identity as generals and as war leaders that now everything looks to them like a military situation. And that a situation like this, where I think she's saying, like, I want the Jedi to help me deal with Death Watch, but a military invasion won't do that. To me, that I think it's a really kind of telling moment for that.
Yeah, definitely. And even when Obi-Wan first gets there, in like the first episode of this arc, there's an attack made against Sabine. Now I'm saying it. Satine. Sabine is a character from Rebels, which we're also watching at this time, and it's getting on there. Satine. Anyway, so yeah, there's someone that attacks her. Obi-Wan runs off and tries to catch them. The attacker ends up like jumping off of a balcony and like killing themselves. It's another one of these, this is a kid's show moments. But then he's like around investigating and like policing everybody in the scene, and I was kind of like, why? Like, what authority does Obi-Wan have to be doing this? And I guess like he was sent there by the Republic to investigate this Satine's ties with the Separatists. So I mean, like, in a way, he sort of has a like outside force being called in. But in another way, like, why aren't you just letting the Mandalorian investigation department deal with this? It's a little weird.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like kind of off there.
Well, and just very like world policey, right?
Yeah. There's another moment in it where Satine specifically says to him that she can't trust Obi-Wan because of how often he relies on violence, which I thought is interesting, especially because and I'm trying to remember. I don't remember as much the rest of the season, and we'll talk about it in the spoiler section in a bit, so don't go into it yet. But I'm very curious to see how much this affects Obi-Wan, because obviously she's someone he really cares about, and we've had other people kind of call out the Jedi a little bit and them not really notice. I'm curious to see if he kind of takes some of this to heart, and if we see him sort of start to become more aware of some of these problems. Yeah.
She just wants him to be a zookeeper. Have kids.
Ride around on animals together.
To leave out his... So okay, let's get into the fun part. Let's talk about the romance here, because it does tie into the whole idea of attachment, but just about the romance. What did you like about this whole arc so much?
It's so great, especially if you compare it to like Padme and Anakin, and Padme makes an appearance near the end of the arc. But it's just like they have such great chemistry, even when they're like bickering with each other. It's like, oh, just kiss already.
Yeah. There's a line that she has about him. Let me show you the what is it? Senators, I presume you're acquainted with the collection of half-truths and hyperbole known as Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yes.
That's a burn, but that's a burn about someone you really care about. Like, that's a very flirtatious insult, if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, that's not something you throw out about, like, some dude you barely know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even when... So there's a point where Obi-Wan's been captured by Death Watch, and he's, like, about to be... There's a machine that's turning along, and
it's like a mining machine.
Yeah, because there's always some machine that the hero is strapped on, him. And someone else has to like show up and turn the machine off. So yeah, Satine needs to turn off said machine, and they're even like still bickering, and he's like, "Turn it off now." And she's like, "I'm trying to. You have to be patient." He's like, "Running out of patience right now," but it's just a cute interaction that they have, and it doesn't feel like forced, and it doesn't feel like Obi-Wan's about to compare her to sand at any time.
This time it wasn't me who brought that up.
There is a lot of sand on Mandalore, as it turns out.
Also
Most
true.
of the planet has been devastated. So
Right.
What we see in the episode is actually like their domed cities. But outside of the domed city, it's pretty much like a desert planet, because of the civil war that happened previously.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Obi-Wan also explains that, like, when he's talking to Anakin about Satine, and how, like, she saw her world just completely ravaged by civil war, and this is why she's so anti-violence.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, it makes sense. And then Anakin's like, "So did you do it?" And he's like...
Anakin plays his part very well.
Yeah.
In all of this.
Anakin's a great wingman.
Yeah.
Which I think also like speaks volumes about Anakin's character, because he doesn't see he's not like shocked and horrified that Obi-Wan has a crush on this girl. He's just like, ooh.
Yeah, he does the elbow nudge.
Yeah.
When they're on a ship traveling to Coruscant, and the clones discover some assassin droids in the cargo hold and call the Jedi for help. And Obi-Wan like jumps up, he's like ready to go, and Anakin says, No, I got this. And like you go be with your girlfriend. I don't know. He uses that line later, I think, but throughout the episode he's like trying to push them together.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think we can clearly see that like Anakin isn't as appalled of like Jedi attachment as maybe he should be.
Yeah.
He just hopes if Obi-Wan, goes through with it, then it'll be okay for him to be married, right?
Yeah.
I
like my buddy's doing it too.
I think this is all a really interesting statement about all of the stuff about attachment, because I think you're right. Like, Anakin has never quite believed this. He very much, he by this point in the show, him and Padme have had their secret wedding. And I think it's very clear that I think Obi-Wan knows, that Obi-Wan, maybe he doesn't know they're married, maybe he doesn't know that they're actually sleeping together. Certainly Star Wars would never acknowledge that, except that she gets pregnant, so clearly something sexual. I mean, maybe IVF, we don't know, but
yeah.
I think they had sex. Oh God. But like, to me, I think for Anakin, this is a kind of very important, like a vindication moment of like, see, Obi-Wan gets it too. And for me, it just kind of brings up this whole idea of this Jedi idea of attachment, because I've always thought it was kind of ridiculous. And honestly, one of the things that leads to the fall of the Jedi is this insistence that people can just like put aside those feelings and just be a Jedi, like a monk. When I think part of what we're seeing is that like Obi-Wan was able to make that sacrifice, but at very high cost. And there's a part of him that clearly still has feelings for her.
Yeah. Attachments needed.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the Vader moment.
Well, so nothing else on the idea of attachment here? I'm just kind of curious, what do you think of the whole Jedi concept of attachment and how this episode's kind of changed any of that?
I think it's just a continuation of everything we've been talking about, especially with Anakin. Like, it's, the first episode in this arc was just Obi-Wan on Mandalore with Satine. And then at the very end of that, they add Anakin for this voyage, the Starship voyage. And it just all works very well. Just him playing the wingman, but also the attachment part of him. Yeah, I think, like you said, vindicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and there's even, there's a moment... So they discover these assassin droids in the basement, or in the cargo hold. I guess it's not really a basement on a ship. Anakin goes down to help out the clones and R2. And R2's freaking out because he just saw like a clone get abducted by this giant
spider bot.
Yeah, like spider bot. It's freaky. And then when Anakin gets down there, he's like, "Well, don't worry, little buddy. Like, I'm here now. It's okay." So like he's even showing such attachment and affection for his droid, which he's done in the past, right? Like there was a time when a ship exploded and R2 was on it, and like Anakin needed to go out into space to save R2 with the thinly veiled excuse that, I haven't wiped his memory, so we don't want the separatists to get him. But it was just to save his little buddy.
Yeah, it was 100% attachment.
Yeah. And I like that that's an undercurrent of the entirety of Clone Wars, that we're always sort of coming back to this like meditation on attachment, because it's been a long time since I've seen the prequels, but in my recollection, it just seemed like such an abrupt, like, Palpatine's like, your wife's sick, the dark side's pretty cool, and Anakin's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Whereas this seems like it's a more methodical, like, really exploring how Anakin could shift to the dark side, both through his relationship with Palpatine and his relationship to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're definitely getting a lot more of that here. Riki, you had stuff about Darth Vader moments you want to talk about?
Yeah, so the end of this second episode, the Senator Merrick from the other planet in the Mandalore system, Calvala, I think. So he's the traitor. He's helping the Separatists. He takes Satine away at gunpoint, and also has a bomb on the ship. So he's got a detonator for a bomb, and he's holding Satine, and Obi-Wan confronts him. They have their little exchange of confessions to distract him. Satine high heels him in the foot and escapes, grabs his gun, and so she's holding Merrick at gunpoint. Obi-Wan's got his lightsaber out. It's very tense, but then Merrick's like, "Aha! Neither of you can kill me, because Satine is a pacifist, and Obi-Wan, you're a Jedi, so you wouldn't just like kill me in cold blood. Like, ha ha ha! I'm gonna get away!" Like, villain laugh. And I think he says a line like, which of you is the cold-blooded killer?"
Yeah.
And then, just perfectly on cue, a lightsaber ignites from behind him, like right through his chest.
Yeah.
And there's Anakin. And very subtly they play the Imperial March, Darth Vader theme music under it.
And both Satine and Obi-Wan are clearly sort of like, Anakin, you shouldn't have done that. But also, they don't seem... they sort of feel like... At least the sense I got is that they feel like they should be mad at him for doing it, but they also know he did what was needed. Like, I don't know if they're willing to admit that to themselves, but I definitely did feel like they were conflicted about it.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, they're both this, like, no killing. But, I mean, Anakin saved their butts.
It bothered me a little how the tension just, like, left that scene. Mm-hmm. Because he kills him, and you hear the music, and I think Obi-Wan is the one who objects and gives him, like, Anakin! And he just shrugs. He's like, what? He was going to blow up the ship. And then, like, that's it.
Yeah.
Vader's going to evade.
Yeah. So it was like 90% of that was really good. And then, like, that last little shrug just kind of, I don't know if it's because, again, like, cartoon, and they didn't want to dwell too much on the fact that it was cold-blooded murder.
Yeah.
But it kind of like, oh, yeah, like, I saved the day. Like, cue the regular theme music. Da, 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 da. That's how it felt.
Yeah. I can definitely get that.
And Anakin also gives a nice, a nice wingman, like, I'm gonna look away now.
Yeah.
Tried to give them a moment to kiss, but then the clones showed up and it was ruined.
Yeah. One other just last little thing that I had, and then I think we're gonna go into a spoiler section. At this point, all three of us have now seen all 7 seasons of the Clone Wars, and so when we do these, we want to, for those of you who are following along, who haven't seen it yet, we will, be sure to only talk about things we've seen so far. But then after a spoiler break, we're going to talk about, how we feel about all this, knowing everything that's going to come later. But one thing I just want to say about this quickly is, the other thing that just kind of stood out to me is at one point, like Obi-Wan says, I would have left the Jedi Order for you. And it just, that's a very powerful moment, but also, like, I kind of know what does that mean? Like, we never actually learn what's the official, like, status of Force users who are not part of the Jedi or the Sith. But as the story goes on, they keep popping up more and more. And so it really makes me wonder, like, do you have to be sort of registered? Do you have to, like, promise not to use the Force to win at gambling or something? Like, what happens if you're a Jedi who leaves the... Because clearly Dooku did it, and Sifo Dyas did it, so there's precedent. But yeah, it just made me really curious about that and want to know more about how all that works.
Yeah. Turn in your badge and lightsaber.
Yeah. Well, not even maybe necessarily your lightsaber, right?
Well, wouldn't you turn in your lightsaber?
I think you would. I think certainly. Yeah, let's talk about that in spoiler section.
Yeah, I was gonna say, are we at spoiler break yet?
Yeah, I think it's a good time to do that now. So, to anybody who is going to check out now, please, thank you so much. Thanks so much for being a great listener. To you and to everybody. You can learn more about this podcast by following us on Facebook or on Twitter, both of which are on the links to them are in the show notes to this. You can also, if you search for Star Wars Universe Podcast, make sure you use all 4 of those words. It should come up. If you have thoughts about what we talked about, please feel free to write it in. to either of those places, or you can find us on Gmail. That information's also in the show notes. So to all of you guys, thank you so much, and we are now going to enter a spoiler section in 3, 2, 1.
Spoilers!
Yeah, we definitely know that you have to give up your lightsaber because Ahsoka has to.
But she gets them back. In Rebels, she's using her lightsabers in Rebels.
She makes different lightsabers.
She makes different ones? Okay.
Yeah. And have you guys seen the newest season 7?
Yeah, of Clone Wars?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because she's given them back, but then she actually leaves them at the end of that one. But that's kind of...
But I thought that was more of a, like, ceremonial... I'm
right.
done with you, Jedi. I'm gonna just, like, nobody takes her lightsabers away from her. Anakin refurbishes them and gives them back to her while she's still in this, like, not a Jedi limbo.
I thought she had to turn them in when she left, but I may have been wrong there. But that was certainly the impression I have, and we'll get to that.
It's season 5, yeah.
She turns them in? But
okay.
She just, like, storms out of the room, kinda, right?
She's actually a fugitive.
Yeah, so take her...
So she doesn't have her lightsabers because she's been arrested.
Yeah. Because, oh gosh.
Okay.
A lot of things.
But then she clears her name.
Yeah, she clears her name, but in that same moment. So they're in the, like, Jedi Council room, and Mace Windu is, like, apologizing, and Yoda's apologizing. They're like, oh, sorry, we should have trusted you and your master. And she's like, yeah, you should have. And they're like, well, back to Jediing. And she's like, no, I'm good. Yeah. I'm done. Peace.
I think it's her choice. I think Anakin hands her lightsabers back, probably. Mm-hmm. And then she doesn't accept it and turns and leaves.
Yeah. And then later, in the episode that takes place right before the beginning of episode 3, she comes back and they, like, make Rex an honorary general so that Ahsoka can...
Commander.
Yeah.
Honorary commander. So that Ahsoka can go off and be on a mission with him without Ahsoka actually being a Jedi. And Anakin gives her back her lightsabers. He's like, hey, I saved these for you. I painted them. And she was like, oh, thanks. And takes them, but then ends up leaving them.
Right. And again, not to go too deep on that, but I just thought it was an interesting note, like, in terms of whether Obi-Wan would have to give them up.
Yeah.
If he left the
But
Jedi.
even so, like, yeah, it seems like there's nothing preventing you from making a new lightsaber.
Yeah.
If you are a Force user, or even, I guess even if you're not.
Well, sure, like, if you leave the Jedi Order and become a Sith, you make a new lightsaber,
exactly.
and it's red.
And it's just this whole interesting question, I think, that never gets really talked about. Kind of like we were talking about global politics. There's a lot of parts of the universe that they don't ever explain. Mm-hmm. I recently rewatched Phantom Menace because we're doing a movie-by-movie podcast now that we're done with The Mandalorian. And one thing I noted is that Qui-Gon Jinn basically just says, like, if you're Force sensitive on the Outer Rim, we never find you. Which made me be like, well, what happens to all those people then? Like,
yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it seems like a lot of them don't really know that they're Force sensitive.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they can do, like in, what movie is it? One of the new movies, where at the end there's the kid with the broomstick. Who, like...
Last Jedi.
Last Jedi, who uses the Force to, like, put the broomstick back in his hand. Right? It seems like... And, in Star Wars Rebels, at the very beginning, we find out that, the protagonist is Force sensitive, but has lived to be, like, 14, 15, and didn't really know.
Right.
Aladdin.
So, like, Aladdin. So, yeah, I feel like it you probably just don't realize that you're Force sensitive.
Yeah.
No, if no one shows up and is like, hey.
Yeah. In Legends canon, in the Jedi Academy novels, Luke tries to restart the Jedi Order, and he goes searching for candidates. And a lot of the search is focused on just, like, people who are lucky, basically. Like, one of the candidates I think they find in a casino who just, like, keeps winning. It's like, how do you do this? You're using the Force.
Yeah.
That's not ethical. Let's talk about that. Well, so anything else? Do you have any other kind of thoughts on this plot arc, knowing everything that's going to happen in the rest of the show?
Oh, my goodness.
I can't. It breaks my heart.
It's so much.
Are we going to talk about that?
Well, I feel like, we're going to get to...
Spoilers.
More spoilers. Spoilers on spoilers.
Yeah. We're definitely deep into spoilers land for... Yeah, I mean, I think, we know... Knowing the tragic end that happens to Satine and sort of how this whole story plays out, it just makes these scenes so much more heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah, and even when we saw Senator, oh gosh, the Prime Minister, not the Senator.
Almec.
Yeah, at the beginning I was like, oh, it's this jerk.
Yeah. Well, so here's my question. Because I think one of the biggest questions has always been, like, why didn't Obi-Wan stop Anakin and Padme? You know, why didn't he kind of realize, like, this is a terrible, terrible idea and will lead Anakin in exactly the directions that Jedi don't want? Mm-hmm. Do you think it's possible that this is part of why? That Obi-Wan still always carries this flame for Satine, and a part of him is like, maybe I should have tried to do this, and I want to kind of not... I still disapprove of what Anakin's doing, but I don't have the heart to tell him no, since I know how painful it was for me.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I think there's also, like, chosen one syndrome in there, right? Like, they're like, Anakin is the chosen one, so they kind of just let him do what he wants to a large extent.
That's fair.
And also, I don't think Obi-Wan willfully, but I don't think he knows the full ins and outs of Anakin and Padme's relationship, right? Like, I think he's kind of just like... He knows. Well, I don't think he knows, like, all the juicy details,
well,
right?
Sure.
Like, I think he's purposely not knowing all the juicy details. Like, right. He could very easily and just, like, sort of turns a blind eye to it. But
he knows that they are in a relationship.
Yeah.
Well, like, I think the scene at the beginning of season 7 makes that really
where
cool.
he's literally
Padme for me.
Yeah.
He's literally being the sock on the door. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It just I think whether or not it's the sort of reason, I think it definitely does put an interesting sort of light on all of that. That, you know, clearly and maybe it's even that he thinks that if he tells Anakin to make the choice he did, Anakin will be like, peace out, I'm going with Padme.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Obi-Wan has got to be tinged with guilt and regret.
Well, he even talks about how he says something like Yoda always talks about giving up attachment, but he never mentions the remorse that goes along with it, or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, sure. There's there's the general remorse, but by the end of it, like, Satine is murdered.
Yeah.
And I feel like Obi-Wan probably blames himself. That if he had chosen to leave the Jedi Order,
and be with her,
then this never would have happened, right? Like, that type of time travel regret.
That's an interesting thing, yeah.
Like, the path not taken.
That maybe somebody else would have trained Anakin and things would have worked out differently.
Yeah.
Who's to say?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
All right, any other kind of last thoughts folks have before we wrap up?
Just gonna rattle through a couple things.
Go for it.
So in the 3rd episode, when she's quote unquote in hiding because this so the doctor tape is shown to the Senate, and they're like, oh yeah, they clearly want our help. And then she meets up with an informant who gives her the undoctored tape. Informant is very quickly assassinated after handing over the tape. Mm-hmm. So then Satine goes into hiding, and she's dressed as a commoner, which is ridiculous because she's just wearing a really big cloak. Yeah. And nobody else wandering around on Coruscant, except Obi-Wan when he goes to meet with her in secret, is wearing a really big cloak. And I'm just like, that's a terrible disguise.
Yeah, that's definitely worth noting. I also thought it was interesting that I'm not quite sure where the idea came out that to be a female ruler, especially one from nobility, even if it's elected nobility, you have to have truly ridiculous hair.
The hair.
Elaborate
when she's
hair
standing
pieces,
with
yeah.
Padme.
Yeah.
Yeah, her and Padme together is kind of an interesting design.
Well, I even thought about that. So I was thinking, because Padme shows up later in the episode, and she's got Padme hair going on. But, it's probably not actually her hair, right? It's probably just a headpiece that has hair on it to make it look like her hair, because that would be insane. And I know, a lot of aristocracy, in Victorian times, a lot of the, elaborate, tall hair that had, birds sticking out of it, it was just a big old wig that you stuck on your head. So I'm assuming they're all wigs. But, yeah, why does your senator have to have crazy big hat hair?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
What else? Any other last things?
I don't know. I really liked this arc a lot. And going back to it, having seen the end of the Clone Wars and even having seen a lot of Rebels, which deals with stuff on Mandalore, made it better. I don't know. It was interesting. Sometimes I worry about going back to old episodes after having seen newer continuity stuff, that you're just gonna like find a lot of inaccuracies or weird continuity errors. But yeah, it just made it better. Like seeing Prime Minister, seeing Pre Vizsla, I was like, no, these guys are.
Yeah, this does seem like a place where they really set up a plot and paid it off later.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of continuity, Mandalore is a complicated place because all of the legend stuff deals with Boba Fett, right, as the primary Mandalorian, and it does a lot of stuff with that, and you kind of have to wash it all away because there's too much. But they cherry pick bits and pieces, like the fact that when Pre Vizsla fights against Obi-Wan, he mentions that the Mandalorians fought the Jedi in the past, and that's definitely a part of a big part of Legends. Is that I think it might have even been like called the Jedi Mandalorian War or something like that. So that was big. They try to like patch the Jango Fett problem.
Yeah.
at the beginning, they mentioned Jango Fett, and I think it's Pre Vizsla again says like, oh, like he's not Mandalorian. He's a bounty hunter who stole our armor.
Right,
yeah, but
a vigilante.
Even when Pre Vizsla said that, I got the impression that it was like Jango Fett could be Mandalorian, but Pre Vizsla's like, that traitor. He's just a common bounty hunter. Yeah, bah, he's not a real Mandalorian.
I mean, I'll definitely say that at this point, watching Clone Wars, watching Rebels, where there's a lot of stuff about Mandalore, and watching The Mandalorian, I am so confused about what Mandalorians are, and I'm waiting to get some more resolution, and we'll wait on that. But that's definitely something I think we're going to see explored more.
Yeah, because in terms of like spoiler stuff, the TV show Mandalorian, kind of, I think at that point, that group, that faction, is not even like a racially Mandalorian thing. It's become more of a collective of orphans.
It's a community with a very strong religion that holds it together.
That is based on the Mandalorian traditions.
Right. Yeah, it's just so interesting because like at about the same time, they were not obviously with this, but like the most recent season of Clone Wars that came out and The Mandalorian, they're kind of releasing stuff about the same society at different points in time, and it just doesn't tie in together yet. So I'm curious to see how it will.
I kind of like it. So we have like the Darksaber as a common thread throughout Clone Wars, Rebels, and The Mandalorian.
Oh, that's right. This is the first time we saw it, the Darksaber.
Yeah. And then we get more about it in Rebels, and we get like a tease of it at the very end of The Mandalorian. So I think like that's a fun legend/mythos that we get to follow through. And then there's also, I like that not all Mandalorians are the same thing. Because I'm going to bring up Star Trek. Sorry. But, like, whenever we talk about Klingons, it's like, Klingons are the warrior race. It's like, then who's writing the Klingon operas? Right? Who are the Klingon architects building the buildings? Are there, like, Klingon janitorial staff? Like, there's clearly more than just warriors on this planet. That's not how a society works. So the idea that we have Mandalore as, like, this fully fledged populated planet, and then there's different factions of Mandalorian, and everybody has sort of a different idea of what it truly means to be Mandalorian. Like, Pre Vizsla and his Moon Clan are like, we are a warrior race. We must get back to these roots. Whereas Satine is just wanting to... I was going to say Sabine again. Who's also Mandalorian? Confusing. Yeah. Satine wants to be a peaceful, neutral planet of just folks doing their thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I like that there's ambiguity in what Mandalorian actually is. Yeah.
Well, it goes to the idea that, like, you don't always know. You know, different people have different stories, and, like, mythology changes. And you know, if 5 people all come from the same town and then scatter because the town is burned down, those 5 are each going to have probably pretty different ideas of what the town was like. And if each of them forms a society that's like, we are the society of people from that town, they'll probably be pretty different. because stories change. I will also say on one of the episodes we talked about The Mandalorian, my partner on that one, Jeff, and I had a lot of theories about what the Black Blade could be, because I'd utterly forgotten this plot line. And so I thought it was kind of fun that we now got to see it. A nice reminder that, like, on these podcasts, we're going to try and do the research. A lot of times we're not going to know all the details, and I think that's okay, because we're not trying to be a Star Wars encyclopedia. We're trying to be a conversation of Star Wars fans. But it was kind of awesome that, like, we just got that negative feedback, and then we're like, oh, yep, this is what the Black Blade is. Okay, kind of cool. And seeing how I'm now going to be excited to rewatch all the stuff in Clone Wars about the Black Blade, knowing that it shows up at the end of the TV show The Mandalorian.
Yeah, and I know you're not...
I like to do the research.
Yeah. You're a nerd, though. Some of us have lives.
No, I love that we do the research. I know we had one fan who said they were very disappointed that we didn't, and I just kind of want to make clear, like, this is not what that podcast is about. Like, we're not going to try to get the exact details. We're going to talk about, like, as a fan, if you'd seen this without doing the research, how would you feel about it? That's I think, what we're talking about here.
And, like, feedback is nice, too. Like, if there's something that we've said that's, like, totally... inaccurate, like, get in the comments, tell us about it. Like, that's a good conversation starter. Like, tell us why we're wrong about our opinion, not our opinions, but like, everyone is allowed to have their own take on this, right? Yeah. And I think, like, we're just all here sharing our takes. But
go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, Matthew's not quite through with Rebels yet, but Rebels has a really fun segment on the Black Blade as well, and I think you'll really enjoy it, and I'd be interested in your take on that as well.
Cool. We'll definitely get there.
So it's established, it's called the Darksaber.
Yes.
It's called...
They establish here...
The Darksaber.
Darksaber, right.
And it's established here in these episodes that Pre Vizsla's ancestor stole it from the Jedi during that previous conflict.
The Jedi Temple.
Yeah. Which is weird to me, because it is unlike any other lightsaber. So I don't know if that means that the lightsabers of that era were constructed differently, or Pre Vizsla or the ancestor stole it because it was so unusual.
Well, certainly one thing we've been told, I believe, is that you have to be force sensitive to be able to be good at fighting with them. And clearly the black saber, you don't have to be. And I don't know if that's because just Mandalorians have trained to be very, very good with them, or in spite of that, or because there's something about this particular lightsaber that doesn't require that.
Oh, there's so much stuff in Rebels, Matthew.
Okay,
we have to get to it.
You can spoil anybody except me, so I will try to zoom through Rebels, and by our next episode, maybe we can talk about all that too.
Yeah, well, I know we were talking before that after we get through Clone Wars, having a sit-down chat like this, going through Rebels, I think would be really fun.
Yeah, I think it's definitely true. What about the hour mark? Any other kind of last thoughts or comments people want to throw in before we sign off?
Mandalore.
Yeah.
That's it.
Do you get that reference?
I don't.
Okay.
I told you he wouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
You were right.
It's a sign.
Well, I will also add my obscure reference that Darksaber has previously, the name Darksaber has previously appeared in Star Wars Legends in a novel of that name, where it's actually a modified Death Star laser that is turned into a starship. So it's basically like, instead of a big sphere, it's just the laser with like a hyperdrive attached to it.
Oh, interesting.
As a sword?
No, as a starship, as a weapon.
That would be huge. Okay.
Yeah, that's where I thought he was going. At first, I thought it was like a little mini, like Death Star laser generates the sword, but then I understood you meant a ship, so that's pretty awesome. So
it's a Hutt clan, and it's built like very shoddily, so it doesn't even end up like working well.
Right. Yeah, that tracks. All right. Well, to our fans, thank you so much. As Sarah said, all I was saying that we welcome the feedback. I just want, what struck me about this feedback was the person was saying like he was disappointed because he expected more of us. And I just want to be clear, like there's great podcasts out there that really try and go deep, and they're going to promise you that everything they say is totally well researched with everything beyond it. Whereas, if that's what you're looking for, this may not be the podcast for you. Here, Riki's going to do some great research. I'm going to always try to look things up. Sarah, I know you know a lot of things. Jeff and I are going to often try and go deep on the research for the other one. But a lot of times we're talking about what would a more casual fan know watching all this? And so I just wanted to kind of make that point clear. But yeah, to fans, so please do write in. If we got stuff wrong and you want to correct us, definitely do that. Tell us what you think about the rom-com we had here. Tell us what you think about attachment and the neutrality policies. Would love to hear your thoughts on any of that. So on behalf of myself, Sarah and Riki, and everyone else involved in this, thank you guys so much for listening. Have a great day.